Well, defining moments in society generally involve masses of people, and they come upon us with a bit of advance warning. Only rarely does a single person's spontaneous action, such as, for example, Rosa Parks taking a seat in the front of a Birmingham bus, begin a large-scale movement in our society. But on a spring day in 1981, on the auditorium stage of Public School 121 in New York City's East Harlem, today's City Club speaker made a revolution. He didn't mean to. Eugene Lang had risen from humble beginnings himself to graduate from PS 121, to graduate later from Swarthmore College and the Columbia University Business School, and he'd gone on to succeed very well in business. But the promise he spontaneously made to those 61 sixth graders in 1981 that he would pay the college tuition of everyone who ended up in college was meant as one person's private pledge. However, the idea was every bit as great as the man who thought it, and the spreading force of that idea would not be denied. The surest predictor of success in American society, study after study shows us, is the level of a person's educational achievement. And the gift of an opportunity for a college education given to one who otherwise would have practically no hope of it is certainly almost beyond value. So Eugene Lang's private act has led to the I Have a Dream Foundation, replicating his pledge in over 40 American cities today. And for Mr. Lang's appearance here today, we are grateful to Leonard Girard of Portland General Corporation, a City Club member and a founder of the Portland I Have a Dream projects, also a member of the National I Have a Dream Foundation Board, which incidentally Mr. Lang chairs. I Have a Dream has now topped the 10,000 mark in guaranteeing chances at college for disadvantaged young students, but they've only just begun. I am honored, tremendously honored, on behalf of the City Club of Portland today to present to you the founder and chairman of the I Have a Dream Foundation, an authentic hero, Mr. Eugene M. Lang.
Thank you, Jim. This morning I had the privilege of visiting the King School and had the opportunity to meet and greet and interact with the first class of dreamers. What dreamers are, we'll get into. And I must say, much as I look forward to being here, this is probably as big an anticlimax as I have ever experienced. But I am still grateful to the City Club for giving me this opportunity to tell the I Have a Dream story and its relationship to our country's educational condition. And it's especially gratifying to tell it here in Portland, where since August 1990, it has been a real-life story. And I must express sincere admiration and affection for my colleagues and resident I Have a Dream sponsors, who, with their generous and caring commitment, have assured each of 221 Portland youngsters, dreamers, a full educational opportunity. And I ask that you recognize Susan Sander, who also represents the support of St. James Lutheran Church, and Pastor Joe Smith, I always also feel very, very deeply and eternally in your debt. To Ken Lewis, who also represents the support of Temple Beth Israel. Ulysses Tucker, Paula and Dan Kinney, Pamela Jacqueline, and Leonard Girard. They're all here, I think, and I really I guess I should say that I have not asked them to, I should ask them to stand up, I suppose, but because eventually, one way or another, they're going to get at you, and I want you to know them when they come. and feel privileged by whatever requests they may make. It was Pam and Leonard who professionally architected the I Have a Dream Foundation in Portland and the two projects that now function under its aegis. And I must also thank the Business Education Compact of Washington County, at whose invitation in October 1989, I planted the seeds of I Have a Dream in this city, and its executive director, Tamara Bush Johnson. Tamara, you're here. Just stand up, you're very special. Tamara made sure that the I Have a Dream seeds that I planted had a chance to germinate, and if I wanted to be a true historian, I would have to say Tamara and Susan together really kept the flag flying until the artillery came up, and I'm very grateful, especially grateful, and I think we all ought to be especially grateful to both of you. And also, my gratitude to your retiring Superintendent of Education, Dr. Matthew Prophet. His warm support, encouragement, and guidance was a decisive factor in getting I Have a Dream off the ground. I look forward to this evening's first Citizens Dinner, sponsored by the Portland Board of Realtors, who will honor Dr. Prophet, and where we will have the opportunity to inaugurate him as honorary chairman of Portland's I Have a Dream Foundation. Each time I come to Portland, I am reminded of my first visit in May 1946. I think we got here just ahead of the Lewis and Clark expedition. My wife and I were on our wedding trip and spent several wonderful days in this most beautiful part of America. And even now, that memory excites a warm nostalgia, especially the memory of our brief stay in a vintage motel on a prehistoric portion of Route 84, where my wife and I had our first memorable argument. Both of us wanted to climb Mount Hood, but she refused to go first. For making this and other delightful moments of personal history come alive, I am so very thankful to the City Club and to all of you. Your presence here today expresses a shared conviction that, as a mandate of democracy, every young American has a birthright entitlement to a genuine opportunity for a good education. Also, the corollary conviction that society does not fulfill that entitlement, especially in relation to underprivileged and minority youngsters, by merely seeking to train young people to meet marginal employment skills, or by systemically lowering academic standards to achieve statistical triumphs. Every child must have a real chance to achieve the fullness of individual capability. But even as I say that, you and I know our education establishment is failing. Disastrously is not too strong a word. Our education establishment is failing disastrously to satisfy that entitlement. As with most subjects that capture national attention, a mythology has become attached to the general perception of public education and its problems. Myth one, that the problem of at-risk, underprivileged students are primarily related to minorities in big cities. The fact is, the adjectives at-risk and underprivileged recognize no racial, ethnic, or geographic boundaries. Most dropouts, over 60%, are white, and 2/3 of them live in cities with populations of 200,000 or less. Myth two, that the problems of education primarily affect the children we classify as at risk and disadvantaged. And yes, these children are tragically affected, but the fact is, so are we. We are at risk when 500,000 children go to school each day carrying a knife or a gun and become disposed to regard drugs, pregnancy, welfare, and crime as acceptable options. We are at risk when more than 50% of all children who started school this year have no credible expectation of higher education, and this in an era when 80% of all new jobs require employees with skills equivalent to 2 years of college. We are at risk when American industry finds only 1 out of 5 candidates with the basic skills necessary to handle entry-level jobs, and will this year spend $30 billion to teach its employees just to read and write. And while competing in world markets, our industry must factor into its costs the marginal productivity of an adult population that is 25% functionally illiterate. Clearly, all of us are at risk, and all of us pay the price. Myth 3, that our educational problems are rooted in the needs and deficiencies of our educational system. No one doubts our schools need more and better facilities. Our teachers need adequate authority and compensation. Our public support services must be extended. Our resources should be more equitably allocated. Our methods and curricula must be improved. However, none of these needs deal effectively with conditions that have abused the educational system by dumping on it the added roles of parent, provider, and policeman. At the bottom line, education starts with having children who want to go to school and who stay in school because they want to learn. The moral of this last myth deserves emphasis because so many of our business and political leaders, in their growing and, one must say, belated recognition of our educational urgencies, have been adopting the word choice as the buzzword for redeeming our public school system. I will not now discuss the serious delusions that are implicit in the context of that buzzword as it is being urged upon us. But apart from other issues involved, do we really believe that market competition can function for education in the same way that it has worked for Japanese cars and Chinese sweaters? If the word choice is to characterize the answer to educational needs, let it be the bottom line choice of each child, the choice of each child to go to school, determined to learn. The I Have a Dream program is committed to foster that choice. Most of you have heard the story how on June 25th, 1981, addressing the 6th grade graduating class of my first alma mater, PS 121 in Harlem, I got carried away by impromptu rhetoric and promised 61 black and Hispanic youngsters a college education. 24 hours later, after I had sobered up, I realized that my rash promise was more sound than substance. For one thing, the years from elementary school through high school graduation would be a long time for the promise of a college education to remain inspirational. Also, projections were that 3/4 or more of these East Harlem youngsters would drop out, not to mention the tragic fact that even with high school diplomas, few would be academically prepared for college. I had to do something to keep the kids in school, to make my promise more than a grandstand gesture, to make it a genuine opportunity. And this resolve was the genesis of what has come to be known as the I Have a Dream program. And let me outline its characteristics. The program is founded on the commitment of a sponsor to establish an I Have a Dream project consisting of an entire elementary school grade of whatever level, the earlier the better. The sponsor, always an individual, must make at least a 10-year personal commitment of time and effort and arranges for the funding of a project designed to keep the kids together under their own I Have a Dream identity, to enable them as dreamers, and that's what we call them, to preserve their classmate relationships however they may be scattered during the years of their schooling. This sponsor-dreamer relationship is the protoplasm of the I Have a Dream program. It is purely personal to each child, probably for the first time. It provides an enduring association that combines the attributes of affection and concern with power and resource. In other words, the attributes of middle-class parents. Each dreamer can come with problems, questions, or just to talk to a respected human being whose caring is viewed as sincere and reliable. Dr. James Comer of Yale, commenting more clinically, wrote, "Although ultimately motivation to learn comes from within, learning is initially a process of identification with emotionally important people in a supportive climate." The sponsor-dreamer relationship is structurally energized by a project coordinator, a suitably qualified person employed by the sponsor as a full-time surrogate to direct project activities and maintain ongoing contact with each child. It is further amplified by mentors who establish one-on-one engagements with dreamers and by programmatic interactions with school systems, colleges, public agencies, church and civic groups, and with corporations and their employee volunteers. With sponsor and project coordinator quarterbacking this support complex, each I Have a Dream project carries out a year-round program of academic, cultural, social, and recreational support in which dreamers individually and as a group are encouraged to participate. The relationship usually reaches into their homes, touching the lives of parents and siblings. Over time, self-esteem, group esprit, and peers of parent and networks of peer and parent support develop. The dreamers come to believe in themselves, in the credibility of their goals, and the rationale of sustained commitment. I believe you'll agree the desire to attend school and the rejection of antisocial activities are functions of will, not compulsion, of hope and ambition, not fear. Up front, every dreamer is guaranteed a college opportunity. But contrary to what many believe, this scholarship guarantee is not emphasized as the primary I Have a Dream feature. We encourage the option for higher education, but as our threshold objective, we want each dreamer to graduate from high school functionally literate and able to hold a fulfilling job. In fact, to most dreamers, the college incentive is overshadowed by the personal elements of the program, and this may explain why public education systems and most institutional and corporate support programs cannot by themselves satisfy the educational needs of disadvantaged kids. Institutions just cannot focus their resources to deal effectively with a human condition that requires sensitive and sustained individual attention. They cannot inspire or reciprocate love and respect. As Mother Teresa said, every I Have a Dream volunteer knows the seeds of love and respect must be sowed by hand. I'd like to comment on the I Have a Dream experience from 5 perspectives. First, in statistical terms. Against a generally projected 75% dropout rate for East Harlem minority students, I might note that PS 121 students in 1981 had the lowest reading test scores of all 635 elementary schools in New York City. With my dreamers, 90% have their diplomas or equivalency certificates. Moreover, against an almost zero projection, I expect 2/3 of my dreamers to go to college. More than half of them are there now, and I had my first baccalaureate graduates this past May. And it is particularly significant to report that the experience of my original PS 120 dreamers is now recapitulating in the second generation of projects that were started in 1986 in New York and other cities. Second, in economic terms, our dreamers in business vernacular are very cost effective. It takes about 400,000 present dollars to sponsor a project of 40 to 80 dreamers for at least 10 years from elementary school through college. That's less than it costs to keep one youngster in jail for the same period, and please note, 82% of all people in jail right now are dropouts. In fact, There are more young black men in jail right now than in college. According to the C.E.D., our annual crop of dropouts at an annual average lifetime cost of $400,000 adds each year a national cost burden of $300 billion. And this $300 billion, as line items in many thousands of government and business budgets, must be factored into our nation's productivity, manufacturing costs, taxes, and social overhead of crime, drugs, and welfare. Third, the way the program has grown and continues to grow. Right now, we have 152 sponsors that have sponsorships that have established enduring personal engagements with over 10,000 dreamers in 45 cities across the country. This represents an extraordinary confederation of caring commitment whose totals continue to grow. And indeed, you'll be glad to know that Portland will be contributing to that growth with its third I Have a Dream project this September. Also, with the cooperation of Jack Kemp and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, we are now experimentally extending our program to establish prototype I Have a Dream projects in inner-city public housing developments. If this effort succeeds, we hope it may lead to a national program that will stimulate family involvement in our educational support objectives and help improve the living environment, the war zone condition in many cases, of housing communities. Fourth, the inspirational effect the program has had on others in their own way to implement the I Have a Dream support concept. President Bush recently stated the I Have a Dream program has stimulated the entire nation's consciousness of educational priorities. I wish he would do something more than that. And indeed, public and private sector initiatives, individual and institutional, involving hundreds of thousands of youngsters all over the country have resulted. Many of these initiatives directly draw upon the experience of our program and the cooperation of the I Have a Dream Foundation. Now, having commented on these four perspectives, I must admit none of them means as much to me as the fifth, the personal relationships with my dreamers. Size and statistics count for zero when I am individually engaged with any one dreamer at an hour of urgent concern or at a moment of warm glory. I recall that hour of urgent concern when Maria Ceballos came to me and cried, "I'm pregnant, what should I do?" And the moment of warm glory 2 years later when, bringing her baby boy with her, Maria proudly came to show me her high school diploma. I brought with me this picture, one of the happiest mementos of my 10 years experience. This is Maria, and this is my first foster grandson. This is not the father, but I really rejoice every opportunity I have to take this out to show and tell, because this little fella here, and the fact that the mother finished high school and is now a junior executive for a major executive, a city bank in New York, that experience alone has made everything more than worthwhile. I recall that hour of urgent concern when Denise Purcell phoned, "Mr. Lang, it's no use, I can't go on, I'm going to jump out the window." And perhaps it would have been hard to blame her. And the moment of warm glory 3 years later, when I discussed with Denise the business courses she is now taking at Baruch College. I recall the hour of urgent concern when 16-year-old Robert Bradford was jailed for armed robbery, and those successive moments of warm glory when I secured his release, when he got his high school diploma, when he took an interim job in the emergency ward of a hospital, and when he started taking paramedic courses at LaGuardia College at night. Truly a succession of glorious moments. Sadly, moments of glory do not assure happy endings. Often they don't. For example, my prospective paramedic, Robert Bradford, is back in jail for selling crack. Still, he is my dreamer, and there's no giving up. Altogether, the warm dynamic of the I Have a Dream relationship, the wonder of Denise, Maria, and most of my dreamers, The radiance of their present ambitions contrasted with the way it was or would have been, all this makes undaunted hope and uncompromising faith, even for Robert Bradford, our constant dolphins. While caring personal relationships give the I Have a Dream program its central dynamic, broad community involvement provides much of its substance. Each project serves as a matrix for attracting individual and institutional resources that are applied directly, responsively, and personally to the needs of its dreamers as we know them. And indeed, colleges, corporations, church and civic groups join in helping our dreamers in many important and imaginative ways. With all of that, the I Have a Dream program by itself can hardly dent a national condition that is ejecting 750,000 dropouts each year into our society. For that deeply rooted condition, there is no quick fix and certainly no institutional messiah. The solution, experience does conceptually affirm, is, to paraphrase Pogo, the solution is us, each of us, doing what we can, serving as a spark plug in a shared community commitment. Now, this may sound like a platitudinous solution, the kind one expects from an education president, and indeed, it is hard to believe that the solution of any massive social problem can be fragmented into thousands of individual initiatives. However, the national experience is convincing that the problems of providing genuine educational opportunity cannot be institutionally solved either by government or by business. We can, of course, swallow token PR gestures or political menus of educational goals for the year 2000 as substitutes for positive action now. But let's not kid ourselves. Each disadvantaged child, each child, is America's problem in microcosm. Each deserves the dignity of individual recognition and attention, just as your children at home were or are lucky enough to get from you. As the I Have a Dream experience indicates, there is much that public and private sector institutions of the community can and must do in association with our individual efforts to meet our educational objectives, but they cannot replace us. Nor can we delegate our capabilities, and certainly must not let the complexities and magnitude of the problem immobilize us or depreciate our ability to contribute meaningfully to a solution. Indeed, we can measure the ripple effects of what we do, breaking welfare cycles, keeping at-risk children in school, inspiring them to be proud and productive in their career objectives, strengthening their will to say no to drugs and other destructive options. At best, the solution will not be quick or easy, but considering where we are and where we are heading, and the Los Angeles experience is indicative of the direction, we surely must try. In 1919, H.G. Wells, in his classic Outline of History, wrote, "Human history is becoming more and more a race between education and catastrophe." I believe that leadership initiatives such as the I Have a Dream program in Portland and the community support such as you are providing to that effort should give us the faith that education can win that critical race. As a testament to that faith, let me tell you the story of Rafael Lopez. When I first met Rafael in 1981, he seemed like a born loser. No father, a part-time mother, subsisting in 2 rat-infested rooms of an old tenement. I didn't know it then, but the school system had classified him as special ed, a boy who, for whatever reason or disability, was considered just about hopeless. "Tell me, Rafael," I asked him, "what's your dream?" He couldn't think of any. However, when he told me he enjoyed drawing, I suggested that he might consider becoming an architect, and I explained how architects design beautiful buildings. Rafael liked the idea, and without further ado, adopted architecture as his dream, and from then on, I never saw Raphael without greeting my favorite architect. One Saturday morning, about a year later, Raphael visited me and I asked him about school. As everything always is when you ask your kid a question like that, everything was fine, great, until I asked, "How are you doing in math?" He looked at me, surprised, with a vague sense of guilt. "Math? I'm not taking math." I said, "What do you mean you're not taking math? If you want to be an architect, you've got to take math." He said, "Well, Mr. Lang, I applied for math, but they told me at school that the classes for math were full, and they said I should take social studies instead. They said it didn't matter, that I'd get the same amount of credit for my diploma, and I did what they told me." There was no point in getting mad at Raphael or the school. That's the way the system functions. The system didn't know Raphael's intention to become an architect, and as for Raphael, he accepted its dictum, and there was nobody at home to suggest otherwise. Well, I was upset, and bright and early on Monday morning I called the school, talked to the principal, and as politely as circumstances suggested, proposed that they damn well better get math on Raphael's program. They did. No problem. After all, there was no reason for the school to know about Raphael's dream. Somebody just had to tell them. Another year went by, and one afternoon I got an urgent call from Raphael. "Mr. Lang, could I see you right away?" He came to my office and told me the problem. "Mr. Lang, my mother's boyfriend threw me out of the house. Where can I live?" Now that was a tough one to have thrown at you, and then I fortuitously remembered that one of my dreamers lived in a large flat with his working mother, who I'd come to know. I called her, and after 2 minutes of cheerful conversation, I popped the question, "Mrs. Walker, how would you like to have another son?" Silence. Mrs. Walker couldn't see my face get red as I suddenly realized what she might be thinking. So I hastened to tell about her son's classmate Raphael and his need for a home. She responded with heartwarming enthusiasm, "Oh, I know Raphael, send him over right away." And that was that. A wonderful ending. What made it particularly wonderful, Raphael, an Hispanic Catholic, taken in by a black Muslim mother. Mrs. Walker needed no sermon on love and brotherhood. 2 years went by. Raphael got his diploma. He couldn't qualify academically for a good engineering school. However, I arranged for him to take a technical program at Hudson Valley Community College, and also arranged with a neighboring engineering college, Rensselaer Polytechnic, to accept Raphael if after 2 years his academic deficiencies were resolved. So, full of hope, Raphael went off to Hudson Valley, and I subsequently got a letter from him, and I will read part of it. "Dear Mr. Lang, I thank you for giving me this opportunity for making my dream a reality. I'm now at the very start of my dream. I'm sure that with your inspiration, you would be my guiding light. I hope that someday I would be able to design your future dream house, and even if you would pass away, God forbid, I will still design your house with your name engraved on the side stating, 'The man who opened many hearts and dreams for the children of America, love always your son, Raphael.'" The story of Raphael Lopez is still unfinished. Whether I will live to live in Raphael's dream house, who knows? But as it stands, the story is a parable for our time. It relates to the lives of millions of children across the country. It underscores the proposition I stated up front that every child as a birthright entitlement must have a genuine opportunity for a fulfilling education. It reaffirms that proposition as a national mandate, as a top priority claim on our consciences, commitments, and resources. It challenges our ability to provide equal opportunity in a free society and must ultimately test the viability of our democracy. Genesis 28 tells of the patriarch Isaac, who sent his son Jacob from Beersheba. And Jacob went out into the desert. At nightfall, using stones for his pillow, he lay down and went to sleep and dreamed an inspiring dream. Jacob dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached to the heaven. Friends, as individuals, as citizens, as community leaders, it lies within our power to challenge and inspire our children to dream, and to recognize education as their ladder to fulfillment. Although, as with Jacob, stones may be their pillow, the future belongs to children who dare to dream and who learn to believe in the beauty, the glory, and inspiration of their dreams. Let us help our children climb their ladders. Let us help our children to believe. Thank you.
As you can tell from that standing ovation, Mr. Lang, you've enlightened us, but I think most importantly, you've moved us. Our first question will be from member host Alan Hutt.
What you've done is certainly an inspiration, and I would be most interested if you could say just a little more about the personal man who evolved these values to do such a thing. I'd really like to know more about you.
Well, if I could answer your question better by telling you more about Leonard Gerard and Pam Jacklin and Ken Lewis. For myself, having lived 73 years so far, it would take much more time than you are placing at my disposal. But I grew up in East Harlem in New York, and often I have asked myself, why was I so lucky when so many of my contemporaries up on 103rd Street never got off the ground? I grew up in the Great Depression. My father never finished grammar school, and during the Depression, both of my parents were unemployed. And as I was telling some kids this morning, that I used to walk from 103rd Street to get down to high school on 23rd Street and walk back at the end of each day, because each way, by doing that, taking that trip, I was able to save a nickel. Now, I suspect nobody here, if they saw a nickel lying on the floor, would bother to bend down to pick it up. Those were different days, those were different values, but nevertheless, that was part of the situation under which I grew up. And why was I so lucky? Well, the answer is, unemployed though they were, my parents, wonderful people, instilled in me from the very beginning the lust for education. They insisted that I read. My father never finished grammar school, but he was enormously educated on his own. And although I did many things, and most of the things that kids did in that time in the process of growing up, some of them I would only tell you if I knew you real well. The fact is, education to me was always an abiding thought, and it never occurred to me that I wouldn't go to college. The thing that I noted with my dreamers back in 1981, when I said the word college, there was big applause. And the fact is, I realized afterwards, virtually none of those kids or their parents in the audience had the slightest concept of what college was all about and the role it would have in helping one become a viable, a significant, a proud member of society. Our program is rooted in that explanation. if you look at most of the children that we're dealing with, they don't have that kind of parent support. In many cases, probably more than half the cases, they're single-parent families. In some cases, they're homeless. Other cases, they shuttle between living with grandma, an aunt, and a mother, a father, and other members of an extended family. The older I've grown, the more I have learned to appreciate the family unit, the ability to draw strength and guidance from a family. And I guess the purpose of our I Have a Dream program is to provide something nothing else can do, that nothing other than human beings can do, to provide our children, make sure all of our children have somebody there who can make that critical phone call to the school and say, I want math on his program, who cares enough to do that, and who the child will learn to respect, to care for, and to be able, above all, to rely on. I think everything else I would say about myself would be just commentary, because that, to me, is the explanation in terms of my background, what I am doing now. One other thing that I would say, that in spite of the fact that we had nothing, I was brought up in a concept of social responsibility. My father was an active socialist. He felt that we had a responsibility to each other as human beings. And in his simplistic way, he would insist that little that we had to make it accessible, share with it, do what we could, whether it's with ourselves or resource, to make others a little bit better. That's something that never goes away from me. I'm going to tell you a story, and you stop me if I'm getting too long. I went away to college. It was a very freak situation that enabled me to go to Swarthmore College. And that's a long story, too. But anyway, I remember during my freshman orientation week, a whole bunch of us were packed into a bus. Swarthmore's 11 miles outside of Philadelphia. So during orientation, we were taking a busload of us to Philadelphia to see the various sites, Independence Hall, the City Hall, and a few other things. And along the way, we stopped at a settlement house down on 4th and Green Street, which was known as the Philadelphia Bandbox District. This was a place which is probably as rugged a place to live as you could possibly find anywhere. The neighborhood was, I guess, solidly black. The residences consisted of 3 family houses, one room built on top of another, with a narrow staircase going up, so to get to the top floor you'd have to walk through 2 other apartments. If a fire or a coal stove down below created a fire, your only recourse was to jump out the window, and the houses themselves would be held up by beams running across the sidewalk. And this was the area where I was taken to a settlement house, the Friends Neighborhood Guild. And the director there showed us around the place and said to us that this would be a great place for college students to come and perhaps be of help. We went back to the college, and I guess it's no commentary on anything or anybody, but I was the only student that reacted to that. And so I decided and started a regime of going into that the guild every Monday, late afternoon, and spend the evening there and taking charge of a group of kids. I was 15 years old at the time, and the kids I was dealing with were all bigger and older than I was. But it really didn't make any difference, and it never really worried me. The biggest problem I had was figuring out what I would do each week when I went there, and keep the members of the club occupied and interested. While this was happening, I was taking my freshman courses, and one of the courses I had to take was introductory biology. And part of what we had to do in biology was dissect a dogfish. Now, the dogfish is about this big, and you'd have a manual, and you'd have a scalpel, and you'd have to go through bit by bit, doing what the manual told you to do, so you could see this nerve or that nerve or this, all the various things that dogfish are known to have. And it occurred to me when I was going through that exercise that this would be a great thing for me to do with my kids at the Guild. So after I had gotten about midway through the manual and figured I had all of I knew all as much about dogfish as I ever really cared to find out, but at least enough maybe to pass an examination, I begged the dogfish from the professor and told him I wanted to take it into Philadelphia and give my kids a lesson in surgery. And he gave me the dogfish, and I went in there with the scalpel and with the manual and had a table set up, and there's about 14 of those kids all grouped around, and I went through the mumbo-jumbo of making the first cut and then gradually cutting away here and there and telling him, carefully looking at the manual, what we were looking at. Of course, the great wonder was when I opened up the stomach and found several smaller fish inside. That was sort of our society in microcosm. Here inside the dogfish were little smaller fish. Be that as it may, the evening ended. It was a very successful evening, and the story now has an interruption. 5 years goes by. I had graduated from college, and the college forwarded a letter that had been sent to the college addressed to Eugene Lang, and in it, it said, "Dear Mr. Lang," he actually said, "Dear Eugene, you may not remember me, but I'm the kid that worked on the butcher truck who was part of your group. And you remember that I worked on the truck, I wasn't going to school. And at some point, he noted I had mentioned that I thought he ought to go to school. In the letter, he goes on to say, he said, "That night you dissected the dogfish." He said, "I made up my mind I was going to be a doctor." And he says, "I'm writing you now from Howard University because I was admitted and I'm starting." I don't know if there's anybody in this room who wouldn't give an awful lot to have had that experience and to receive that kind of a letter. Sort of the kind of a letter I got from Raphael. It came out of the clear blue sky. There was no calculation, no expectation. Here's something like that came. Well, when something like that happens, it's got to change your life. It places a value on yourself, on what you are, what you can be, your worth, the dignity of the human spirit that's in each of us. And I tell you that story now, not because of this question, but because I think that each of us, not as citizens, but each of us owes it, we owe it to ourselves, to each of us, to be able to conduct our lives so the opportunity to receive a letter like that can become the uplifting, the motivating experience that really probably will be more satisfying to you than almost anything you could do, any way you could enrich yourself. I've been poor and I've been rich, and I know my preference. But nevertheless, there is nothing that has been more meaningful in my life than what I have been able to do, what I have learned to do in being able to communicate what there is in me to care for a child and make that child life worth much to me as well as to the child itself. And I would commend that experience to each one of you. If each of us has that experience, no child in Portland will go uneducated.
I'm Mary Norquist, City Club member and member of the Standing Education Committee. Our question is, the benefits of the I Have a Dream program are obvious. However, it seems to create a lottery award system in that if a student happens to be in the right school, in the right class, then they receive the benefit. What impact does this have on other students and the perception that luck or magic play some role in bringing about good fortune? Also, if you could briefly comment about the public policy implications of the program.
The first question is a very good one and a thoughtful one. However, I think it tends to underestimate the attitude of a child and the understanding of a child. It would be, you remember I said the program takes everybody in the class. To me, not to do that is something that's unacceptable to a child. It's not fair. Why him and not him? We insist on everybody. On the other hand, what about the class that comes after, the class that's in another school that doesn't have the benefit? Kids will understand that if you have one sponsor, you can only take one class. That's something that's common sense. Discrimination isn't right. But we've asked this to a kid, and it's very coincidental that you use the word lottery. I heard a kid answer that question, yeah, I wish it'd been us, but it's like the lottery. That's something you can accept. That doesn't justify it in a sense that every child is entitled, should have that kind of support. But on the other hand, recognizing that we can't lick the entire world, we cannot not do something. We can't be immobilized. And we can't also forget the fact, and as I try to emphasize again and again, this is what we as individuals do. We can't wait until we can tackle the whole problem, but by the same token, each child that you do address is the problem. Let's no longer assume that our society is so institutionalized that we can only think of categories and groups. You would not think of your own children, your own child, as a category. Your child is a child. And regardless of anybody else, you want something for your child. Fact of the matter is, each one of our dreamers also is a child. And I guess it's relevant to say, from an old Talmudic expression, if you save one life, you save the world. That's what we are doing. I know, and it's nothing heroic about it, I have saved lives just by a telephone call, just by being there at the right time, just by showing a kid how it's possible. I had 7 of my girls who had babies, and every one of them got a high school diploma, and 5 of them are getting higher education. That doesn't happen by accident. Under normal circumstances, none of them would have finished high school. All of them would have been public and welfare charges, and the idea of college would have been impossible. But it wasn't any great trick. The facilities were in the community there to take care of all of the different kinds of problems that a teenage mother has in order to survive. The trouble is, how do you put them together? Who was there to help her put them together? Who was there to even find out what existed? It takes so little to do so much. And when I say so much, there isn't one sponsor that won't be able to tell you from experience that just being there at the time some particular, perhaps trivial issue came up made the difference in experience and social value to the community between life and death. And that's the total problem. I don't know if you're willing to accept that as an answer, because the only answer to your question would have to be statistical, and I don't think we can deal with the problem of children on a statistical basis. It took a long time, it took generations for things to go in the downward spiral where we are today, where 1 out of 5 kids is born to poverty, and 40% of the population today are considered to be minority poor. It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to get back to where it ought to be in a hurry. But we've got to get with it. We have to start with it now, and we have to recognize, as the Chinese proverb goes, the voyage of 1,000 miles starts with that single step. And all of us have got to really not be discouraged, not be afraid to take that step, because that step is part of the solution, and that's the way the solution is going to come.
Our time has expired, unfortunately. I think Mr. Lang has done a good job of reminding us that time is running very short for a lot of disadvantaged students in the Portland area and nationwide too. We'll take that to heart, and our heartfelt thanks to you, Eugene Lang, for being with us today.